Hello and welcome to today's Cybersecurity Summit Power Hour. My name is Rick. I'll be in the background answering any WebEx technical questions. We have a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties joining the WebEx session, please submit a question using the Q&A panel. During the presentation, all participants will remain in listen-only mode, and as a reminder, this event is being recorded for rebroadcast. We'll be holding a Q&A session at the conclusion of each of today's presentations. We encourage you to submit written questions at any time during the presentation using the Q&A panel at the bottom right of your screen. Please type your questions into the text field and hit send. Please keep the drop down as all panelists. With that, we invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy today's presentation. I would now like to introduce Bradford Brand, CEO of the Cybersecurity Summit. Bradford, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you, Rick, and thank you everyone for joining us. This is going to be our final power hour for the New England region. We are very excited to have speakers from the Cybercrime Support Network, KnowBe4, Okta, and of course our closing comments are going to be from the Department of Homeland Security's Cyber Division called CISA. If you join us for the entire duration, you'll be getting a CPE credit in approximately 2 to 3 days by email. And then right after the sessions of Power Hours, we're going to be rolling into our Cybersecurity Summits. They are going to be virtual. They're going to kick off July 28th, pretty much for the South Florida region, primarily in Tampa area. And then we're going to be rolling it out all throughout the United States. We do miss our live events, and we will certainly, hopefully, start those up in 2021. So let's just get on with our Power Hour. We're going to bring on Kristen Judge. She is the founder of the Cybercrime Support Network, which basically gives cybercrime victims a voice. She is got a great background in cyber, and she can probably go into that. And one of the most exciting things she's working on is creating the 211, kind of like the 911 for emergencies. It'll be for cybercrime victims, where they can call a number, they can report it, and then hopefully triage that and get the problem solved. And she'll be addressing that as well. So certainly look for that out in the news. Kristen, can you hear me? Are you with us?
I am here. Thank you for having me, Bradford. It's such a pleasure. I've always enjoyed your work.
Well, great. Well, thank you for joining us. And you now have the floor.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. At the Cybercrime Support Network, we started this nonprofit because we realized that the typical consumer and small business, when they've been a victim of a cybercrime or incident, they really don't know the first place to go. How do we get help? We wanted to make sure that we made it a simple, easy way for people to get to the answers that they needed. So I went to an amazing network of people that I've worked with over the years. I've had the pleasure of being a part of the MSISAC, the National Cybersecurity Alliance. I worked with the former White House and DHS section before it was CISA. And so I've worked with a lot of CISOs and CIOs across the country. So you can see we have a really distinguished board that helps us set our direction and stay on task. This is just a small number of the partners that we work with. You can see federal, state, local law enforcement, NCFTA, I'm sure many of you know, NW3C, Cyber Threat Alliance. Michael Daniel's been a great confidant and supporter and helping me really navigate what we should be doing and staying in our lane. This is a lane that no one really has been in before CSN. And I had this idea about 8 years ago when I was an elected official, and one of my constituents called me and asked how he could get help for a sister who was impacted by a bad guy on Facebook. And so I called law enforcement locally and said, hey, where do I send this guy? And they said, well, Kevin knows a lot about computers. And that wasn't really the answer. I'm like, where's the law enforcement response for cybercrime? And unfortunately, our great partners in law enforcement don't necessarily have the training or the staffing to handle the millions and millions of cybercrimes that are happening. So we want to make sure that there's an easy way for the victims to report and then recover afterwards. And so we want to provide a clear path for them, like a 911, like Bradford said, for cybercrime victims. Now, whenever I say that, I'm always talking about consumers and small businesses. We know that medium to large-sized businesses have the capacity to call Mandiant and get help from the CERT and other places. But it's those forgotten victims, the romance scam victims, the small business email compromise. Those folks really don't know where to go, and they're not reporting. I'm so excited to see that IC3 has gotten a lot more reports since COVID. Unfortunately, there's more people being impacted, but more people are finding the way to report. And until we get the true cost of cybercrime, we're not going to be able to get Congress to act to serve this victim class. So we really want to increase the number of people who are reporting. So that's another one of our goals. We need to just really get people the services they need, and then we need to count them. Until we count the victims, I don't think we're going to get the funding that we need. So I want to point out this. Many of you already know that the statistics are pretty grim, but if you look at the IC3 Internet Crime Complaint Center for 2019, they had 450,000 Americans complain that they had been a victim of cybercrime. You know, we think it's more like 1 in 4 are actually a victim, but 450,000 reported. Of those 450,000 that reported, they lost $3.5 billion with a B. So just think about that. Only 450,000 people lost $3.5 billion. So when we look at the statistics, and Gallup did this poll, we've done our own research, I've heard from other organizations, it's about 1 in 4 Americans are a victim of cybercrime. Sometimes they'll say that's within 1 year, within 2 years. Let's just extrapolate, assume it's 1 in 4 every year, especially now with all the COVID scams. That would actually be about $338 billion lost every year. To me, that's an economic crisis, and I think that's the kind of thing that can get leaders in elected positions to act if we put it in economic terms. So that's what we're trying to help educate people on. This isn't economic, it's an emotional, sometimes it can be a physical issue, and we want to focus on what are the actual types of cybercrimes. And when I first got started on this, I thought, okay, let me find out what's the national definition of cybercrime, what are the national categories of cybercrime, because if we want to count the victims, we have to have the same language when we're counting them as everybody else is using. What we found out was there is no standard definition or category list or taxonomy, whatever you want to call it, for cybercrime in the US. So I thought we were just going to be helping victims, and then we got pulled into this issue of a cybercrime taxonomy for law enforcement. So if anybody's interested in working on that issue, we're now working on it on an international level. We partnered with our Canadian friends. We're working with the World Economic Forum. Europol's been involved. So we're looking at what's the actual language we want to use and define, because if we want to catch cybercrime criminals, we have to have common language. So that's another thing that we got pulled into, just because we're focused on the victim. So the victims that we really want to focus on are folks like this gentleman. Grandparent scams, romance scams, these are, you know, crimes of opportunity. And with the amount of isolation and people that are feeling lonely because of COVID and being in our homes or being ill, there's even more crime happening. So grandparent scams, if you're not familiar with them, just happened to a friend of mine. The criminals actually followed the obituaries, and they saw the obituary of this gentleman who had died, and they realized that the grandson's name was Connor, and that the man was born in Pennsylvania. So they called the widow a week after the obituary hit and said, "This is Connor, your grandson. I'm in Pennsylvania. I've been in an accident and I need money right now." This is happening over and over and over again. And we need to make sure that those people know where to call. If they call 911, unfortunately, which is where they call many times, they're usually turned away because it's not the appropriate place to call. So we wanted to answer this big question. I've been a victim of a cybercrime, whether it's a business email compromise as a small business, or a romance scam, or a grandparent scam. Where do I start? Where do I go if I've been a victim of cybercrime? And we asked 911 dispatch centers, what are they seeing? And one of the dispatch centers I talked to, they said they can have either 0 to 100 calls in any given day from cybercrime victims that they have to turn away because people will call. This is an actual tweet from the Philadelphia police. Someone called 911 because their YouTube was down. I have another tweet from an LA County sheriff that said, don't call us when your Facebook is down. To some people, their Facebook being down is an emergency, but there's a lot of people calling for smaller crimes too, and they're going to the wrong place by using 911. We want to take that pressure off of 911 so people that have true emergencies can get through the lines. And I call this the hotline issue because part of the reason people are calling 911 is because there are a lot of great resources to go to. But if you just put into Google, I've been hacked, where do I go? You get about 8 million hits. And these are just some of the hotlines in the US that can help people if they've been a victim of cybercrime. But for the typical victim, especially if they're in the middle of, I just lost, $50,000 of my savings, or I'm being cyber stalked and I don't feel safe, there may be reasons why they don't have time to call 4 different hotlines and find out which is the best one for them. So we want to take all of that confusion away and give them one number to call. And we're not making this up on our own. This is already happening, and we found 5 countries that have created one number to call for victims of cybercrime. And I'll highlight 3 of them here. And they've all been very gracious and are letting us learn from their best lessons and pitfalls of what's happened with them. So UK, Canada, Israel, and now I've also talked to folks in Australia. They have one number to call nationally for consumers and small businesses to report a cybercrime and then get the help that they need. One issue you'll find that is they have jurisdictional legislation. And I was talking to the gentleman in Australia. He only has 7 local police forces in the entire country he has to work with. So it's pretty easy to have that great communication. We have a lot more complex system here. But what they found also in one of the countries, they had a security operations center that was helping people, but then they realized, okay, wait, now they need mental health counseling. They can't pay their rent. They don't have money for food because they just gave it all away. And so they brought on some social workers to help after the crime for people to pick up the other pieces. And so I'll talk to you about our solution. I think we've got the best solution here. But we don't fool ourselves and think that because of our work, now everybody's going to, prosecute the bad guys and there's going to be all these convictions. 50% of the time there, in the UK, there was absolutely no law enforcement response because either the perpetrator was in a country they don't cooperate with, or the perpetrator could not be found. So there's a lot of reasons why people may not be able to get a law enforcement response. So at CSN, we looked at those international programming and we figured out what can we do here in the US. And when we talked to the 911 dispatchers and did our surveys with them, they said, can you please just create a website that we can send people to so they can triage themselves and we don't have to just hang up and say, I can't help you. So Fraud Support Now has had about 600,000 visitors in the past year and a half. You can go there if you're a small business or if you're an individual. You click on I'm an individual and you've got 5 categories to start from. If you pick financial purchase scams, that breaks into 9 different categories. And the reason it does is because there may be a different path for you to take depending on what happened to you. And this is the difficult part about cybercrime. There's, if there has been a shooting, you call 911, people know what to do. It's a very straight line. Here, it's not such a straight line. So if you click on online shopping scams, for example, you'll get some immediate action steps to take, and then you'll get advice on how to report the incident, how to recover from it, and then how to reinforce your security after the incident. And so I don't see that as pure prevention, education, and awareness, because after someone's been a victim, they're much more likely to actually want to reinforce their security. So we try and get them while their attention is on it. And then here's some of the categories for small businesses. in addition to the website, we started working with 211s in these first 6 states here, and we got federal funding from the Department of Justice Office for Victims of Crime to help these states triage through their 211 centers cybercrime victims. So we created training, we're working with law enforcement, and then telling the public just to show the federal government that we do need a response. We need one number to call, and 211 already exists. And what they do is they help people with human services needs. So if you call 211 in your area, it's usually run by an amazing United Way, and they can help you find food, shelter, mental health, counseling. And so it was a really great place for us to have the victims start. In the states where we do have 211, we found very unsurprising information here. The people are calling about exactly what we thought they would be: imposter scams, financial purchase scams, cyberbullying. So we really weren't surprised. The audience that we hope to reach is the audience we're reaching. And we realized that with Google, we need to help people spot if they are in the middle of a scam. How do I know if this is a scam? So when Google approached us as one of our sponsors, they said, could we make a simple site that's really geared towards seniors that says, if you see these 3 things, it's probably a scam. So I hope you'll check out Scam Spotter and share it with people in your life. It's been incredibly positive and popular since it was launched at the end of May. We've been very fortunate to get a cooperative agreement from CISA, and it's great to see Clint on the line with us, who's been very supportive of our work. What we're trying to do with our cooperative agreement from CISA is to build out a feasibility and a pilot of how would we serve cybercrime victims, but also get the threat information. So we're doing a pilot in 5 states where we will have the people report to fraud support if they've been a victim of cybercrime, and we're going to be able to share the threat information with state and local, tribal and territorial SLTT organizations in a push out. The folks who gather the information right now, law enforcement has to go in and pull it and query their area, but we want to test out pushing the threat information. So our cooperative agreement has already been refunded for next year, and we're hoping that this will just be a long-term relationship and we can help build a national system. When you go to fraud support, there's a lot of great resources, and this resource library is going to be housing about 1,600 resources that will be searchable based on where you live, what type of crime you've been a victim of, and so on. And this is part of our cooperative agreement with CISA. So check it out. End of September, it should be live. We create a lot of great collateral for people that have already been a victim. What are some immediate action steps they can take right now? So please subscribe to our YouTube channel. If we get to 1,000 subscribers, we're going to be able to do a PSA at the YouTube studios in New York. So we'd love your help there. And when we define success at CSN, we say we have increased reporting, increased recovery by the victims, increased resources for someone after they've been a victim, not prevention, and then a decreased amount of crime because we decreased the re-victimization. People that call our 211 numbers have been saying that after they've been a victim and talked to 211 specialists and gotten the help they needed, 90% are saying, I don't think I'm going to be a victim again because I feel smarter, I feel empowered, and I know where to go. So if we can decrease re-victimization, we're going to save people and companies millions and billions of dollars. That's our goal. We're a true public-private partnership. We're so thankful to the great companies that have come to work with us and the federal government. So we get funding from public and private sector, and everybody comes to the table on even footing. So we're really thankful for the partners that we have. And as you see, KnowBe4, who's on the call, Stu, the founder of KnowBe4, I literally had to spend 20 minutes on a call with him. He understood exactly what we were doing, and he sent me a check. So he was one of our first sponsors, and I really appreciate him understanding the value of what we're doing. So I want you to be able to get a hold of us at CSN. If you email info@cybercrime support, our team will get you where you need to go. If you need me, go to check out our website, share information. If you want to get some posters to put up in areas in your community or rack cards, send us a note and we'll help to get you the information you need so you can tell people about this amazing solution. We hear so much about the problems and the scams and the threats, and that's important. But I think the public is really ready to hear about a solution. We know cybercrime is a problem. We know it's getting worse, but where do I go for help? And that's really what our mission is to give them that place. And we're so thankful for the hundreds of partners that have come together with us to help make it happen. So questions. Bradford?
We have, yep, absolutely. Let's just open up my screen there. There we go. Yeah, we have an interesting one here. How did it could be for you, could be for Clint, but with your deep experience, you'd probably know. How do the banks handle fraud cases that are reported by individual people using their bank? Are they part of the large corporations or part of a consortium dealing with fraud? I usually have put in a fraud claim through my bank. How do they fit in with the whole mix? So yeah, where do all those fraud claims go, I guess, when there's a false charge?
I could take it first. Can certainly, he probably has more experience on this, but there is something called an SAR or a SAR report that the banks have to fill out. And the first thing we tell people to do, if it does involve their bank or financial institution, is go report there. But then some of the folks that were working in the financial institution said, it would be really great if after our people come to customer service and take care of their bank issue, if we could send them to fraud support or 211 to continue in their recovery. So it's really a symbiotic relationship, but they have a method that they have to report. It's called a SAR, S-A-R.
Gotcha. And you put up some very, very good slides up there. Are any of those slides, we've been getting a few of these, any of these slides going to be available that we can put up on Cyber Summit USA after the Power Hour?
You're more than welcome to share this slide deck. Absolutely.
That's terrific. Well, great. Well, thank you so much. And we look forward to having you at another Power Hour that's be coming up, I believe, in a week or two. And hopefully maybe at our live events when we have them in 2021, it would be an honor to have you join us.
I will be there.
Great. Well, thank you for reaching out. I'm glad we made this connection. And we will tee up our next speaker. Thank you so much, Kristen. And let's get our next speaker up there. Rick, if you want to put up the next slide. Great. So now we have one of the leading cybersecurity companies, know before. Perry, can you hear me, Perry?
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're looking good, and you sound great. So I'm going to let you run.
Sure.
Okay.
All right. So thank you, and thanks, Kristen, for that great presentation too. And I appreciate the shout out and that. That's as you were going through that, I was really just resonating with the cause that's there, and so thanks for that. I'm going to throw a ton of data at everybody today, and I hope that I'm not going to overwhelm you. But what I wanted to do is share some of the results of a study that we ran internally with a huge data set all around the types of phishing simulations that we're able to run. Quick background on me. I came to know before from Gartner. I ran the security awareness Magic Quadrant space and worked with companies around the world and security awareness vendors around the world on how to address this human problem. And over the years, I've really just become a lover of the psychology of security. And so that's my interest, is what are the levers that cyber criminals pull that will make somebody click a link? And then, of course, what are the things that we can do as security practitioners to drive better end user security behavior? And that comes down to behavior science and psychology as well. So we already talked a little bit about know before, but let me just get straight into this. Data is important when we think about this problem, and measurement is important when we think about phishing, because there are certain questions that every executive asks anytime you start to say, well, we ran this test in our environment and we had a click rate of X%. And of course, you already know the question because you're probably asking it. It's what's that mean, and how does it compare with others that are like me? And so we want to talk about that a little bit, and I want to give you some encouragement in that data, that comparison data that's going to be critical for you to answer those types of questions does exist, and we have it. So, and we publish a lot of that out for free, regardless of whether somebody's a know-before customer or not. And then, of course, we have tools internally for customers that can make that comparative data even richer. But the data is something that we have available and we give away as a public service. So let's talk about phishing for a second. We all know that phishing is a huge problem. It is the go-to attack for cyber criminals whenever they run up against technology that's hard to defeat, or even if they just want the quickest way in. A lot of times they'll start with a phishing attack with the assumption that it's just going to work, because it does so often. It's a critical part of the cyber kill chain. And as part of this, when we start to think about the problem of phishing, there's the problem of publicly existing data that we have to deal with. And so you want to understand your attack surface and the amount of data that exists, because it is the reconnaissance phase when a cyber criminal is looking and seeing what's your organization look like and where are the soft parts, where are the parts that they can begin to exploit. Some of those exploitation vectors are people that they can find enough information about to start to pull those psychological levers whenever they begin to weaponize their attack vector. So let's get into the data. We looked at over 17,000 organizations, 4 million users, and 9.5 million phishing security tests. So that's the data set that we isolated and looked at out of the larger data set that we had. And we wanted to really get into the granular comparative data across the 19 industries that are there, and then across these 3 different sizes, between 1 employee and 249 employees, 250 employees to 999 employees, and then 1,000 plus. So that's a couple different things that you can pivot on. You can start to look at your industry, or an industry similar to yours if you wanted to look at that, or you can look at the aggregate of all industries, and then you can look at companies in similar size to you. And when you have both of those, or all of those coming together, you can start to understand the value of that comparative data. So what we did is we wanted to look at it across 3 different phases. So anytime you start doing simulated phishing, you have that baseline. You've never done this before. You've not necessarily prepared your people. And so phase 1 is, if you've never trained your users, you send a phishing attack and you see what the resulting phish-prone percentage is. That's what we mean by PPP. To do this, we monitored employee susceptibility to initial baseline phishing security tests, and from that established set of users, we looked at any time a user had failed a phishing security test prior to having completed any training. So the key thing here is also that we're looking at the combination of phishing simulations with training, because that's the best practice, is when we combine that information delivery-based training with a phishing simulation, then you're starting to get the best of both worlds. You're combining the information component with the behavior component, and you're using those to reinforce each other. Phase 2 is, what's the resulting phish-prone percentage after users complete training and then receive other simulated tests within 90 days. So what we're getting to is an established pattern of phishing users at least every 30 days. And so when we start to see the results in phase 2, I think you'll be shocked and pleasantly surprised at what can be achieved in just that 3-month time period. And then over a year, we wanted to see the final resulting phish-prone percentage after users take ongoing monthly simulated phishing tests combined with the training. And so when we do our initial baselines, it's pretty scary. These are some of the abysmal results that you see in healthcare and pharmaceuticals and small business, 44.7% phish-prone percentage. And again, this is without any training. This is that initial baseline. medium construction, almost 50%, large technology organizations, almost 56%, and you'll see some of the other ones that are extremely concerning there as well. Now, this is phase one, and you will have the slides for this because I understand that these numbers are pretty small, and this is a data-rich slide. So I'm not going to call out very much here other than just to say it's pretty much universal. If you've never done phishing simulations before and you send out that first one, you will be shocked and dismayed at what the results are. And this is with a fairly generic phishing template that people begin to use initially early on as well. Now, you could be really crafty and ramp up all the little psychological levers, and you could get that to 70% or more if you really, really wanted to. But this is generally people go with kind of a softball exercise at first, and they're still dismayed by the results. But I encourage you, just take a second and find your industry, find your size there, and take a look at what those results usually are. Now, the conclusion here is that absent of training and absent of doing this, your susceptibility or your likelihood of being phished is pretty high. And so anytime we really understand something like that, that triggers a need to act on it. Now, you might be saying, all right, I'll throw more layers of technology in place. And frankly, people have been trying to solve this problem with technology for decades. And there's always the hope of doing something. And that hope is always dashed by the cyber criminal that just goes around it in a different way and exploits a human. So what we know over and over and over again is that technology alone will never be the fix. And so we have to add that human layer of defense in place. In the same way that if we only relied on humans, there would be many exceptions to the rule, and it would be a very porous solution. And so adding both of these together undoubtedly increases resilience. We can't ever do one at the expense of the other. So within 90 days, here's what we can get to. We can effectively cut that in half if you send out simulated phishing emails and do your training. It's pretty simple. It's a pretty simple solution to a large problem. And if you maintain this ongoing, you'll start to see the results. But the really encouraging thing to see here is that if you just do something over a 3-month time period and you're training at a behavior level, you will see some positive results. And those positive results are staggering when you look at the amount of difference that's made just in that short period of time. And this is, again, I'm not just evangelizing KnowBe4 here. What I'm evangelizing is the practice of simulated phishing. So you can do that on your own. You can do that with one of our competitors. But doing it is the key. And that's really what I want to get across is if you do this according to best practice, you will see results. And then after a year, here's what that comes down to. Now, you'll never get anything down to 0, but I think that you would agree that moving down from close to 40% down to 4%, 4.7% is a really, really good result. There are very few things that you can do that have that type of payoff within a year, especially in the training space. And so the key here is that you're using that information that you do have to give every year, but you're reinforcing it by focusing on specific behavior patterns. And specifically what we're talking about here is that simulated phishing pattern so that you can build the strength, you can build the resilience and that secure muscle memory that you're looking for. Now I'll go ahead and pause here for a second so you can find your own type of industry here, and you can find your own size and get an idea of where you're trending. And again, this is all answering that question that executives ask is, all right, you've given me some data. What does that mean in context? This is your context. And then here's the long-term chart, and it's really, really encouraging. Again, if you're And what we've seen over and over and over is that secure email gateways and other types of technology-based products, while they're good, they are not perfect. And there will be times when a phishing email, and a very good one, will just land in your user's inbox. And so if you're not preparing them for that, then you're just leaving them unguarded, and they'll click every time. And so what you want to do is you want to add this in so that you are preparing your employees for that day when your secure email gateway will not process or will not detect that that's a phishing attack. And there's other attacks that will just bypass it every single time. You know, well-crafted business email compromise attacks will bypass a secure email gateway. You also want to be able to train on phishing, so voice phishing. You want to be able to train on a number of things that are in that social engineering realm, because that's where the attackers are going to go whenever the technology does try to keep them out. And so what we see overall with those areas that we started with is an 88% improvement. That's pretty darn good. And the average improvement overall was 87%. And again, you can look up your own industry and your own size here. So this is, I think, really, really encouraging, and I think really speaks for the effectiveness of this type of approach. So let's talk a little bit about some of the regional data. And I don't want to bog down here too much, because I know that most of us on the line are from the U.S. But if you have multinational organizations, you might want to look at this as well. What we did look at is some very chunky regions, so Africa, UK and Ireland, Europe as a whole, and then APAC. And then we gave the breakdown here. I'll give you this just to digest on your own. But what you'll see is there's a lot of consistency there in what they're seeing. This is a different data set. This is a fundamentally different data set than we had for the other one, because of the way that we had to pull the data, and we go through the methodology for that in the report. Now, the important thing to see here is the ratios of change. So Africa, baseline 29.2, after 90 days 21.8, and then after a year 5.3. So you see that good decline. A little bit less drastic decline over the 90-day period, but still getting down to about 5% after a year. In UK and Ireland, 26.7% to 13.9 to 4.7. Again, just these ratios that matter more than anything else. Close to 30% down to under 15%, down to under 5%. Same thing with Europe, close to 30%, down to about 15%. And then we didn't have enough, because we're just now pushing into Europe in a big way. We didn't have enough data for a year, but you can extrapolate and guess that would have probably been right around 5% or under. And then in APAC, it's another relatively new area, but we did have some one-year data for companies that were under 1,000 users, 29% to 17% to just over 6.2%. But I think that skewed up a little bit because we didn't have that other data set for 1,000 plus. All right, so what do we do to create our human firewall? I'll end this with this and see if we have any questions or some discussion that we want to have. People are the critical fabric here. We can't go just technology, and we can't go just people. We have to recognize the importance of people within our security fabric. And so you'll hear me almost emphasize the people side at the expense of the technology side, because as security people, we tend to really like the blinky lights. We like to buy things that we can put on a subscription, or we like to bring a box that we can plug in, because that just makes us feel better. We can complete a project that way. Now, the thing with people is you're never done. And so we always talk about managing the ongoing problem of social engineering, and that's because attacker tactics will evolve, and they're always going to be trying to move around the periphery of what the technology will allow them to do. and they'll always be trying to exploit humans in ways that are really common. They're rooted in human nature, but they're adaptive based on the situations that that person is in, or the situations for the type of data that they're trying to steal, or the attack vector that they're trying to use. Now, here's where traditional security awareness went off course. Security awareness and secure behavior are two different things fundamentally. Security awareness is all around information delivery, and it just doesn't work. And I break it down into these three things. Security awareness fails because of what I call the knowledge, intention, behavior gap. You can have knowledge but not intend to act on it. You just don't care about it. And a lot of us have knowledge and we don't care about certain things. We're not going to act in that way, even though knowledge and data points us to that conclusion. And even if we intend to act on certain things, we don't always behave in that way. And the big example there would be New Year's resolutions. I have great information about the benefits of doing X. I even intend to do that. Let's say lose weight, save more money, spend more time with family. All of those very common things that most of us put down. The problem is about 2 weeks after New Year's, those lists just haven't been followed up on. We don't do it because we make these in the moment decisions. So that knowledge, intention, behavior gap is something that we wrestle with. Even if people say, hey, I understand how to create and remember a good password. I even intend to do it. In the heat of the moment, when they just have to create an account on the fly, they're not going to do it. They're going to go back to some little internalized algorithm that they have and create a crappy password. It's just what people do. So if I were to boil it down, here's 3 realities of security awareness. And I codify all these in a book that I wrote called Transformational Security Awareness, available where all books are sold. Number 1 is just because I'm aware doesn't mean that I care. Number 2 is if we try to work against human nature, we will fail. And I always tell somebody, if there's a gap between your policy expectations and your behavioral reality, it's probably because your policies expect people not to be human. And so you want to look at where those gaps are and start to see if there's ways that you can adjust with human nature in mind. And sometimes that's technology adjustments that you can make. Sometimes that's process adjustments. Sometimes that's just expectation adjustments. And then the last one is what our employees do is way more important than what they know. And I'll say it as clearly as I can. What somebody knows or the knowledge that was in somebody's head has never stopped a breach from happening. The only thing that allows or prevents a breach is what somebody does at the time of behavior. And so it's the doing that matters, not the knowing. And sometimes people do the right thing without knowing why. And sometimes people do the wrong thing without knowing why that was wrong. And sometimes people do the wrong thing just because they didn't care. And sometimes people do the wrong thing maliciously. But it's the doing that matters. That knowing is kind of a secondary piece. Now, I'm going to go ahead and skip through this really quick, but here's where simulation comes in. Whenever we're crafting these for our organizations, we do want to understand the kill chain, and we want to think about what information is available about our company and the people that are there, because you might want to start to craft some specific attacks just based on the reality of your organization, the way an attacker would see it. You can do very, very baseline attacks as well that don't take that into account, and that can still be effective. But to have the most effectiveness, I want to follow the kill chain. I want to understand my attack surface. I want to understand where there are vulnerabilities out there, and then I want to test according to those also, and then understand the impacts of that so that I can adjust. So whenever we're building our phishing attacks, you do want to think about these psychological levers from self-interest to curiosity, because curiosity opens this little window in our head. It's like an itch that just has to be scratched, and that's really effective as far as baiting a hook. You want to deal with human nature, things like helpfulness or fear, or urgency. You want to do that in an ethical way, but you don't want to give yourself a false sense of security by not doing something that a real attacker would do. You want to go as close to the line of what a real attacker could do as you can manage within your organization, and just set the rules and set this up like a game. You're not trying to shame anybody or make them feel bad. Ultimately, you're trying to come alongside them to strengthen them for the good of the organization and for their own good as they navigate this life of which technology is just one part. Here's the way that I talk about security awareness. We do want to think about this from a messaging standpoint, and we want to build long-term campaigns that have various forms of messaging across different channels, and then we want to integrate social engineering testing at various points, every week or every month, whatever the acceptable timeframes are within your organization. If you do it less than once per month, you're going to limit your effectiveness. So as often as you can do it on the simulated phishing front, I would encourage you to go ahead and do that. But I do realize that you have some constraints there internally. So let's go ahead and finish up. It's all about humanity. That's what I'll say. It's all about humanity and working with human nature instead of against it, realizing the behavior patterns that we fall into, and then realizing that we can affect the result. And the data backs that up. And then, of course, I've given you some data as good comparative sources that you can use whenever you're wanting to evaluate the effectiveness of your own program. So with that, why don't we go ahead and, just for the sake of time, I'm going to end there and see if we have any discussion that we want to have.
Great. Thanks, Perry. We just got a question here from Mark. He asks, to avoid the old too many fire drills where employees don't take the real fire incident thinking it's a drill, is there a point where you think doing too many phishing attacks is negative?
Well, it's all around how you set up your program. So if you set it up to where people don't feel the effect of what happens whenever they click on a phishing email, well, then something's wrong. And I'm not saying that you necessarily penalize people or fire them or anything else, but you should build some reward structures in. You should build something that is constantly reinforcing the messages that you want, because ultimately, if you gamify it in the right way, then people will enjoy submitting fish whenever they suspect that one is there. And that's something that I kind of glossed over a little bit. In human behavior, there is a behavior, and anytime you're trying to get rid of a behavior, if you can add a replacement behavior in, that's good. And so if you think about this in the physical world that we live in, if every time I wanted to drink let's say a caffeinated soda, which I'm addicted to, I could say every time I wanted to take a drink of a Coke, instead, if I would just go grab a glass of water, at least that's a replacement behavior. I'm not going to feel hungry, or I'm not going to feel thirsty after that. The same thing with phishing. Is every time I avoid clicking on a fish, there's still a curiosity of, was that real or was that coming from my security department? Well, the replacement behavior is submitting that using one of the fish, what we call our fish alert button, and some of the competitors have those as well. And that sends it off to your incident response team. And there's ways that you can set that up. And usually the default way is that it will say, hey, congratulations, you submitted a fish that was part of our phishing simulation program. Great job. So that answers the question within the mind of the user. But if it's real, then you can come around on the backside and you can reward that person as well.
Okay, we have another question here from Michael. The threat surface extends well beyond the organizational boundary, internal email system, cloud infrastructure, we all know that. How do you balance the unknown personal email, social media, etc., with the known internal know before testing results to drive awareness training?
That's kind of a both and. So our platform specifically also gives you the ability to look at deep web and some dark web information to see what is known by cyber criminals about the email addresses associated with your people, and can even make some inferential leaps around tying social media profiles together and so on. That is an optional component that's not integrated within the system unless you want it there. But we call that Email Exposure Check Pro, and we also have some other tools around that add that inferential OSINT type of stuff that a real cyber criminal would do.
Okay. And let's see, some other questions here. What is the point of training if I can never get my phish prone percentage to 0? I don't think that's going to be the case. There's always going to be one person, even myself, clicks on something. So
that's true. I would just turn it around and say, well, what's the point of your secure email gateway if one phish gets through?
Yeah,
it's the same thing. That's why we have security layers. Or what's the point of a firewall if it can ultimately be bypassed in some way? Every piece of technology will have a fail point. Every layer of security will have fail points. And so the argument then is that you layer these in the hopes that not everything fails at the same time.
Sure.
And that's ultimately what we're doing when we're talking about layered security.
That's a great question, again, from Mark. Should you tell your employees in advance? My personal knee-jerk reaction is no for the first tests, right? To get a clean slate of, all right, this is this is what we look like. What do you think?
Yeah, I generally don't tell employees in advance too, because I don't want, let me turn that around. I want to get a real result, the same thing as if there was a full phishing onslaught going on that was perpetrated by a cyber criminal.
You don't say there's going to be a fire drill and then have
Yeah. And I don't even, the first time I do it, I don't even want to redirect to training the same way that you can with some of the other phishing failures that are out there. Yeah. I want to give a clean result, so I'll redirect to a 404 page or something that looks like a legitimate login page for something else, but I don't want them to be aware that they were just tested or that they were fooled in some way.
Sure. Okay.
But then after that, you just set the tone right. So I'll say that you don't want to have a tone where you're shaming people, you're making them feel bad, you make them feel like you're laughing at them behind their backs. If you set the tone right, you'll decrease resistance to phishing tests like crazy, and you'll increase some of the gamification elements.
Right. Well, on that, my question is, what do you do with the employee that keeps failing?
Yeah. So a hard one. So there's no right answer to that. Within some contexts, you may have to take disciplinary actions. I would go back to we're always working with human nature. And there was a great story that Chris Hadnacky, who's a great person to follow, he told me that they were evaluating phishing failures, and they were seeing failure after failure after failure with one department. And when they really got in and investigated, that department was set up to fail because they were literally given the mandate of you have to open every email and open every attachment in every email, because they were in an HR department that was in recruiting. And they had no systems, no support, and they were understaffed. And they were measured based on their throughput of how many emails they processed and the amount of workflow that they were able to get through. So they had no ability to be successful in this. And sometimes we put our people in those situations and we can't hold them to that. So in those accounts, you have to say, is it the person or is it the situation? If it's the situation, maybe there's different technology, maybe there's different processes, maybe we add browser isolation or some other tool that can help deal with this risk that's associated with that person or that environment.
Right. That came out probably about 15 years ago. There was an HR law for anti-discrimination that every single resume submitted must be reviewed. And of course, in the HR department, if it's a false application and the attachment is a virus of some sort, then it's automatically going to fail.
Yeah. So look at the situations we're putting our people in.
Interesting story. Yeah. Oh, so with that being said, I have a job fair company called Tech Expo, which kind of aligns with Cybersecurity Summit. What do you do with the HR department? I mean, with a law that dictates you've got to review every resume, how do you fight that?
Yeah, well, I mean, some of that is you have to think about how to isolate that risk. So if you're putting people in the environment where they just have to detonate everything, I mean, it's like you have to think about it like you're sending in the bomb squad within those. And so you do want to
isolated. I'm sorry to interrupt. Maybe put them on an isolated network.
Yeah, an isolated section of the network, or use a combination of browser isolation so that they're potentially detonating this more safe environment.
Right.
And move them to a computer on a stick, or some type of environment that can be recreated every day. You just want to treat it as the dirty and dangerous environment that it is. And it's like sending somebody in for decontamination at the end of the day.
It's really fascinating, and I think what a great opportunity for your company, for any company, to actually go after the HR departments and train them and guide them on that, because they have to open every resume.
Yeah.
And every resume is a potential grenade.
It is. There's still some best practices. Usually resumes shouldn't ask somebody to enable macros or something like that. We can still give some general training around things to be aware of. And there are things that I would say, if an HR department gets it, that they should trigger some questions within their mind, and they could still send that to the incident response team for a quick look and then release. The main thing we don't want to do is stop their process flow. So if we can give them a quick way to say, I don't know about this, let me have somebody else look at it while I continue to process other stuff, well, then that's still allowing them to get their job done. And then that, as long as that process has a closed loop where they eventually get the answer on whether that was real and safe or not, then we're not impeding their workflow.
Right. I hope not too many hackers are on this call, because what a great way to go into a company, to get right to the HR department. There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, thank you so much. A couple of questions have been some of the slides. Can you share some of these slides with us?
Yeah, we'll have the deck available, and the data is part of a report that we put out once a year, and you can find that on our website, and I'm sure we can make that available as well.
Great, and certainly be sure to have contact information so that people can reach out to you if they have any further questions or if they want to try your service.
Yeah, sure. So you can always hit us at knowbefore.com. You can hit me up on LinkedIn or Twitter, anywhere that people are social.
Well, yep, thank you. Fascinating discussion. Thank you so much, Perry. Wonderful.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
You got it. We'll see you again. All right, let's get our next speaker up. Great. We've got from Okta, Garinda Bhatti. Garinda, are you with us? Let's get you enabled. Rick, do we have? Bhatti, are you there?
Yeah. Hi, Brett. How are you?
I'm doing great. Are we doing just slides, or are we going to do visual?
I can, I guess, share my video as well.
Okay. As long as you're fully dressed, then that's great.
Perfect. I have control to move the slide deck. Just want to make sure.
Yes. Rick, pass Garinda the ball there. Yep, you have it. Be able to advance.
Okay, perfect. All right, so I'm going to navigate this over. Right, we can. So, sorry, just need to see if I can navigate the deck.
Yep, you should be able to. I believe, Rick, you always use your space bar. Perfect. We are off and running. Okay. thank you for joining us.
Perfect.
And I'll leave you to present.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, thank you for joining. Senior Solutions Engineer at Okta and located in New York City. I've been with Okta for about 10 months now, and prior to Okta, I held numerous positions focusing on cybersecurity in various financial services institutions, including Moody's and the New York Stock Exchange. So my core presenters before me, they gave a lot of information to consider, and a lot of it centers around enabling end users with resources to properly navigate the threats that they're exposed to. And I want to talk a little bit about how those modern threats are impacting organizations, especially in the climate that we're facing today. Now, full disclosure, right? I think like the rest of the presenters, we didn't really know the exact content that each of us was going to be presenting. But it's interesting and encouraging to note that the person or the identity is involved in all three of our methods of sort of mitigating security threats and filling in a lot of those security gaps. As we're all virtual, it'll be hard obviously for me to poll the audience. So I'll just make my point with this example. 5 months back or so, concepts like social distancing or having to wear masks, let's say when we step into a supermarket, were sort of foreign to us, right? Zoom was not on pace to become a verb, much like Google did 10, 15 years ago. And another term that's come to the forefront is this whole concept of the new normal, particularly when it comes to IT. And because of this new normal, operational patterns have changed in the IT industry in the last 5 or 6 months or so. But I believe it's not, so much a paradigm shift as an acceleration towards a future state. Obviously, working remotely over VPN is not a new idea, right? But at the same time, it's never been at the breadth and scale of what it currently is, and it's never been all of us at once. I mean, regardless of if someone is part of an IT team for a retail chain or working for a healthcare provider, if they have the ability to work remotely, they were asked to do so. And, considering that this is the new norm, if you look at the trajectory of where we were headed before, offices were mandated to close, with the proliferation of cloud adoption, mobile adoption, and a globally distributed workforce, I'd say that we were closer to this current state of operation than even to 2019 way of operating, right? Now, one other thing I'll say about this new normal is that I think there is no going back. Leadership in a lot of companies were reluctant to pursue a scaled up remote version of this remote workforce because it was frankly uncharted territory. Will employees be productive? How will employees collaborate? Will the business continue to operate? And all these questions have been answered, obviously in some cases with mixed results. But if there's a cost savings to be had via eliminating office real estate or if there's employee sentiment to ditch commuting costs and time, this new normal will become just the normal. So we as IT leaders, we need to solution for the challenges that it brings with it. So I was supposed to get to the slide after, but let's just go here. That's fine. A bit about Okta, right, before we go any further, as some of you guys may not be familiar with our journey. Okta is a fully cloud-native identity management platform. We started out in 2009 as a single sign-on and multi-factor solution, and have continuously evolved over the years to expand the catalog of services that we offer, all centered around identity and access management and security. And along with our internal strategic map of deliverables, a lot of these products and features are a direct result of what the industry was lacking or the gaps we saw in the identity space. As you can see here, we've grown tremendously over the years, where as it stands today, there are over 8,000 customers in all verticals that are trusting us to protect access to their most sensitive data and applications. Over 95 million authentication requests go through the service every day. So, we essentially take that responsibility very seriously and are fully committed to implementing a secure and trustworthy solution as well. So, when it comes to access and enablement, right, the goal of any business should be to enable the right people to have the right level of access to the right resources in the right context. And that context needs to be assessed continuously. Moreover, this needs to happen with the least friction as possible for the end user. So how do you implement such rigorous security controls while ensuring that the end user experience is being accounted for? So this slide, as it started off with, right, you focus on the people, and like my co-presenter said before, starting to focus on that identity and making it user-centric is definitely the key to some of this. And we'll dive into that as well. So, like I said before, the trajectory of cloud and mobile adoption was already pointing us towards this perimeterless architecture. Right? Historically speaking, with all your applications, when they were on premise, with your application's data, your identity was also on premise, and it was stored in predominantly Active Directory. So identity became simply another application in the technology stack, right? That has changed clearly, and that's what's made Okta successful today. As organizations are moving to the cloud, you need that bridge, right? You need that layer to connect all of your employee identities, which are still on-premise in something like an Active Directory or an LDAP, to all your cloud-based applications. And Okta serves that function today. We do single sign-on between users and their applications. Multi-factor authentication. We provision, and deprovision users into downstream systems to automate that end-to-end flow of a user's lifecycle of removal evil. Now every enterprise most likely uses Active Directory as their source of truth for their workforce credentials, right? But we don't just connect users from Active Directory to their cloud-based applications, because what we're seeing increasingly is that the attributes, the information about those users is not stored in Active Directory, but it's brought and consumed from cloud-based applications like a Workday, a RingCentral, or even like a G Suite. And what Okta can do is not just connect users to these applications, but we can synchronize information between these cloud-based applications and on-premise systems. And in doing that, we're becoming that new source of truth. And when you look at tomorrow, as Okta becomes that source of truth for every member of an organization, Active Directory can be relegated to be a subsystem, configured just as another downstream application, which you can configure identity for from Okta. And while AD is becoming less and less important, obviously it's not going to be lived out overnight, right? Every organization still needs to use Active Directory because there might be some legacy dependencies with it. But it won't be their source of truth, right? Okta will become that source of truth. And in doing that, we can connect, users in those organizations, not to just their cloud applications. We can connect them to their workforce IoT devices and workforce IoT applications, API-based applications, obviously their on-prem applications as well. And more importantly, we can connect organizations to each other. So we had done a recent survey and found out that only about 16% of organizations are on an explicit zero trust journey, but consequently 97% are engaging in zero trust projects. So based on that data, there clearly is something to this. And what we learned from a lot of security leaders is that it's not necessarily the intent of a zero trust strategy. Right? I'm sorry, it's not just the name, right? But it's the intent of a zero trust strategy that's compelling them to take on these projects. And the intent is it's rooted in those security leaders realizing the gaps that are associated with the legacy security framework. So let me expound on that a little further, because it's a security strategy that a lot of organizations are still practicing, right? Traditional enterprises have operated with this premise of classifying their networks as being trusted and anything outside of that as being untrusted. And this has enabled, solutions like firewalls and gateways to be the main catalyst for security controls. Now, the problem with this model is that it doesn't translate to the way modern business, how modern business is done. And by association, it doesn't translate to how networks need to be designed, right? And nor does it account for the SaaS adoption that everyone is undertaking where, critical resources are no longer on-premise or in your control. And finally, it also doesn't take into account how to combat modern threats. If the policy engine behind that is based on this premise of this basic delineation of what is considered, trusted versus untrusted based on a company's network terminal, right? And as we fast forward to the state of organizations today, the challenges I speak of are thrusted into their lap and require immediate solutions because the shift to a complete remote operational state was so sudden, right? IT and security teams were sort of rushing to deliver this minimum viable solution out the door to meet the business needs, as offices were shutting down and people were mandated to basically work remotely. But what we're seeing in the field is that, despite this minimum viable implementation, organizations are not prepared, right? They're not prepared to provide the capabilities. They're not prepared to provide the user experience, and most importantly, they're not prepared to provide the security, and all of which are an absolute must as you shift access and enablements away from your corporate officers to basically an open network. So I speak about this trajectory of adoption and advancement, and what it ultimately leads to is this notion of a software-defined perimeter where you have different identities, be it employees or partners, customers or contractors, all accessing applications and resources that are spread throughout, right? They could be in your data center, in your apartment private cloud. They could be the SaaS solutions or workloads that you're migrating yourself into one of the three cloud providers. And to top it off, right, the method of access also varies from a device perspective, as end user clients are ranging from, let's say, corporate Windows laptops to iPads to mobile phones, be they corporate issued or even of the BYOD nature. So how does this, software-defined perimeter architecture tie in with Zero Trust, right? Well, the idea behind, the idea of Zero Trust being that the, control of least privilege be applied to all authentications, regardless of the user being on a corporate network or not. Now, the caveat to this is that although, a fully and complete policy control needs to be applied, it need not be applied explicitly, because we can't forget about ensuring that we're implementing security with the least friction as possible, which I referenced earlier, and I think Perry alluded to as well, right? Because that's very important. Because if there's any user experience issues, your user simply will not adopt that control, right? Or they'll find ways around it, or just not use it. And I think that's where the Okta solution can provide great value. So when you step back and assess this new software-defined perimeter, one thing to derive from it should be that identity is the only constant that we should put in, right? The resources or the services a user accesses, the method of access, location, device, all that can change and do change, but the identity of the user does not. And that helps to implement a zero trust strategy, which anchors the user at the center, and everything else that is associated to that user can be looked at as this user's context, right? So let's look at what a security posture would look like with identity being at the center. So I mentioned earlier, as far as what Okta is and, being a fully cloud-native platform, right? And one of the advantages of being a cloud-native platform is the vendor neutrality, right? And it allows us to not be tied to any particular ecosystem and provides us the ability to have deep integrations with industry leaders from different silos. So a zero trust strategy, we start off by first understanding who the user is, based on the standard security model of, what they know, what they have, and what they are. And for these, Okta has native technologies, but we can also incorporate third-party technology as well. Next is determining, the device being used. again, third-party technologies can be leveraged to learn more, but we have a roadmap to offer this capability natively later on this year. Then we move on to understanding the context from which the user access is being requested, right? And it can be based on data points we collect. The device they're on, the user, their location, the network they're on, and the application they're on. Now, one of the key differentiators, right, is the ability for Okta to validate authentications well before they even arrive at the customer's office. Now, I spoke about the 8,000 plus customers that we have that are using the Okta service, and a significant byproduct of that is that we have deep insights at the overall service level to understand, interpret, and categorize those authentications, right? We know what a malicious IP is, what a malformed packet request looks like, what a password spray or credential stuffing attack pattern is. So that data lake of authentication produces this network effect, which we're able to leverage and implement protections for all of our customers simultaneously. We can also layer that contextual information collected by other third-party technologies. So, talking again about that vendor neutrality and being cloud native allows us this. Now, between identity and context, right, we can perform behavior analysis and designate the right level of access by running those through a risk score engine, the access policies you design from our dashboard, and the authorization servers to issue the appropriate, WSFed, SAML, or OIDC credentials to finally grant access to applications, APIs, and servers as well. And finally, all these signals can be collected and sent to best-of-breed services for analysis and orchestration, allowing your organizations to run risk analysis, configure alerting, and also design steps to mitigate any abnormal behavior steps. So, to emphasize, right, the continuous assessment of a user's context is absolutely critical. And since we have established that identity is at the center of this methodology, you're able to implement a fine-grained authentication and authorization access control policy based on the contextual evaluation of that user's identity, right? And just in summary, right, Zero Trust is not a single solution, but it's a methodology for implementing a security posture. And as organizations are continuing to move towards this perimeterless open network concept and consume, more resources that are not tied to their on-premise infrastructure, whether it's because it was, originally on their roadmap, or maybe their hands are forced due to unforeseen circumstances like COVID-19. Identity becomes that linchpin which can anchor your security and your security frameworks. So I'll stop there, and I'll definitely open up the forum for any questions.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. And let's see. First question, of course, is with regards to your slides. Will some of them be made available, or all of them?
Yeah, absolutely. We can make the deck available.
All right. Terrific. What would be Okta's approach for enabling and removing organizational access to applications and services for end users?
Removing? Sure.
Yeah.
So I mentioned lifecycle management. Again, Okta started out as single sign-on multi-factor, but we saw a need to be able to do the full lifecycle management for an end user's identity. So by lifecycle management, what I mean is when a user is onboarded into your organization, into your source of truth, we're able to take that user and provision them into downstream applications based on the assignments that you dictate in Okta. Not only that, if that user changes roles, if that user changes department and no longer needs access to a particular resource, that change in your source of truth, whether it's Okta, whether it's Active Directory, whether it's perhaps an HR system which we integrate with, as long as that change is reflected in that source of truth, we can go ahead and reflect that in that downstream application. Now, more importantly, I think, from a security perspective, is this whole concept of offboarding, right? Essentially, when users no longer need access access, whether again it's because of a willing termination, a unwilling termination, or even a job role change, it's imperative that access is removed. And what we've seen in organizations is a lot of that effort is manual. You have operational teams that are processing, let's say, ServiceNow tickets to go ahead and onboard, offboard users, and there's also a chance of mistakes. There's a chance of delays when it comes to that, right? So I think it's crucial to have that assurance level, both from a security perspective and a regulatory perspective, to say that if this user is no longer needing access, I have 100% confidence that as long as the source of truth is reflecting that, that will be reflected in their access control policy.
Okay. And does Okta have an end-to-end visibility of who is accessing an organization's resources?
Yeah, absolutely. With again, identity being that central driver for access and control, we have full visibility into not only when a user accesses certain applications or resources, we have the ability to see who assigned that access, who brought that user in, when that user was brought in. So there's a complete audit trail associated with an end user and their whole lifecycle.
Terrific, terrific. And how would people contact you post this Power Hour? What's the best way to reach out to you?
There's I don't have the specific contact, but obviously on Okta.com there's specific contact for sales, for engineering, for support. So you guys can definitely reach out there, and any of the social media applications as well.
All right, terrific. Thank you so much for joining us, Corinna. That was great, very informative.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we have our final presenter that's coming us from the DHS, Clint, who has spoken many times before. Clint, are you with us?
I am still here, Bradford. Thank you.
Okay, great. You are like a veteran at this point, with us at least. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Yeah, I'm going to get a little bit off script here because I know we're running behind. I want to be, respectful of everybody's time. So I'm going to try and get to some of the key points, but not really stick to the scripts here too much. No, we have slides, but we don't need to use them. So first off, I want to say some great presentations happened before me. There's lots of good information there. I can tell you that when I was doing pen testing, the HR department was one of my favorite targets because they do click on everything. As it's been pointed out, that's one of their main roles in the organization. So how are you setting up your HR department with what permissions is a very big thing. The world's changed though, and so just really quickly, my name is Clint Walker. I'm with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. These are the obligatory slides that, show you who we are and what we do. We're a newer agency, we're part of the Department of Homeland Security, but we are the nation's risk managers. We are here to look at risk both to federal networks and to critical infrastructure throughout the United States. So we work on both the regulatory side and the voluntary side in order to make that happen. We do everything, from proactive cyber and training, and we do, watching our own networks. We're working with state, local, territorial, and tribal governments. We're working with critical infrastructure. As I said, there's 16 sectors of critical infrastructure out there, and this is who we're working with in order to make, a more safe and secure environment. We've heard about things from the, the public sector all the way down to the private, where the individuals now have a place to call. DHS for businesses, DHS is what we're trying to set up is where we're the place to call it if people are having issues or concerns. And we can reach out to all the different ISACs, the MS ISAC, or any of the other ones out there. We can reach out to FBI, Secret Service. We're trying to figure out what the, common operating picture is from the cyber landscape. What we're seeing right now is mostly, with COVID and everything happening, the way that the landscape has changed, we're really seeing the public health sector. So healthcare and public health has really been a main target right now. Of course, financial is always a target, but healthcare and public health, as well as the transportation sector, have both been targeted during this COVID. But that's really what we're talking about, is what are the cyber threats out there? This is a slide deck where I normally talk about these big, overarching, slides or threats that are out there. But the landscape has really changed. How many of you are using your help desk at work to solve people's home internet problems, or to, your help desk is becoming their, go-to place because they're working from home, their home in network's not really working with the way that you have things set up. Your infrastructure, your perimeter has now shifted because of where everybody is working. We're seeing increased attacks on home routers. I mean, if you look out there, Netgear has been, continually attacked at the moment with some new vulnerabilities that have come out. So a lot of these, commercial grade, equipment have flaws built into them, or they're improperly set up at people's homes. Your workspace is now put into those people's home. Your VPN connection starts at the laptop and goes right into your network, bypassing a lot of security controls. And so if the threat actors can get onto these home networks and find a way onto that laptop, that's what they're really looking at. So, and then we're seeing application security come into the forefront too. You have nations that are banning certain applications. The big thing in the news right now is the TikTok app. Which countries are going to allow, which countries aren't. Are countries starting to use, or nation state actors starting to use, commercial applications on phones and on computers in order to spy or get data, from individual users or individual organizations. So that's what we're looking at. And it all comes together with scams and with, the phishing and things like that. When you're really looking at a cyber program, you're looking at 4 major assets that build into your cyber program. Technology, of course, is the asset we all think about when we think about this. But we also have the data. I tell people all the time, are you really worried that that laptop got stolen? Or are you worried about the data on the laptop? Why are your security controls around securing the laptop instead of securing the data? And then, of course, people is our greatest strength in any organization. They also happen to be our greatest weakness. And there's some great talks about, from KnowBe4 about, how to strengthen that program, how to make them aware. But, inadvertent or insider threat, whether it be advertent or inadvertent, is still one of the biggest things out there. And then, of course, your facilities, how secure are your facilities? If I have physical access to a box, I own that box. That's just the way that the world works. And so are you really looking at today's threat landscape to see where your cyber program is going, what you're trying to do with it? Because it is the foundation to our world. And we use the term cyber now because it's no longer just about information technology. And that's where a lot of people really focus their efforts, is on their IT shop. We forget about the fact that now cyber is IT and OT, or operational technologies, or what has become known as the Internet of Things. Do you really have a robust program that's looking at this Internet of Things, everything from phones to badge access systems, elevator systems, environmental control systems, door controls, lift stations, critical manufacturing, healthcare? How are you taking the full scope approach to your cybersecurity program? How are you looking at IT and OT? And then how are you looking at your users? How are you looking at how people are being targeted? Because it keeps shifting. With every new event out there, it shifts. COVID had us shifting in one direction, a lot of phishing and, whaling going on with the COVID, especially in the healthcare sector. Then the civil unrest happens. All those scam emails start to shift focus. They keep the user guessing, is this real, is this not real? They're able to pull information about who's in your HR department. What is your HR department's duty? What kind of applications are they looking for? How can they embed their malware in something that they're going to get people to, to click on? What job postings do you have out there? They're looking at everything for your organization. I always like to tell people, I would always look at an organization, whether they were posting something on their webpage or something about having a party or any type of gathering, because I would use that to send out phishing emails to say, hey, everybody, that, Food Truck Friday is coming up. Click on this link to see the menu of which trucks will be there so you can start your order ahead of time. People would click on that all the time. And all I had to do was a little bit of research in order to target your organization and get something that people were already aware of that was happening and make it more likely that they would click on what I needed them to click on. But that's really what we're looking at here, is that integration of people, facilities, technology, and data. I mean, it's in our buildings, our environmental control systems, badge access systems, camera systems. It's in our production systems, our cars, our healthcare, heart monitors, defibrillators. Everything is now controlled through central networking. Everything is now part of the IT infrastructure. Those integration points between IT, OT, people, and facilities, that's what the bad guys are going after. That's what the threat actors want to get. Can they hide in an OT system in order to attack an IT system? which person is the most likely to click on something, or which person is going to give them the best access to either the badge access system or the environmental control system or the IT system that they really want. How can they further their cause? Who is the threat actor that you're most worried about? Is it a nation state? Is it a criminal actor? Is it a hacktivist? You just never know. I mean, you really have to do your research and due diligence to find out what you're trying to protect yourself against. And that's really what we're looking at here, is that IT-OT integration. You know, because when you buy an OT system, you're buying something for a longer life cycle. You're buying an elevator system or a badge access system. You want that system to be around 10, 15, 20, 40 years. And yet you're refreshing your IT systems every 3 to 4 years. Those integration points still have to work together. You might have legacy systems just because it's the only thing that'll still talk to that old, you know, robot that you have that needs to do critical manufacturing. All of these things need to talk to each other. Have you segmented your network? Do you have an understanding of how your network is supposed to be? And that is the key. So I'm sure everybody, I hope everybody had a great 4th of July weekend. I spent my 4th of July weekend taking care of ransomware. You know, I had partners calling me up all weekend long saying, I've been hit with this, I've been hit with that. That happens every holiday for me. My holidays are usually spent doing incident response. And this time, you know, over this past weekend, a lot of that was because a lot of these organizations were saying, you know what, we've never baselined how we look now. We've dispersed our workforce. People are working from home. We have different centers. We've moved a lot of stuff to the cloud. We no longer know what normal looks like. We don't know whether something's an anomaly or something is normal traffic anymore. We haven't baselined our network flows, our data flows. We don't know if Sarah logging in at 2 o'clock in the morning is a thing that's supposed to be happening anymore. They haven't taken the time to say, what is the new normal for us? When is something, you know, when are our thresholds going to change? And so they're not able to react anymore or stop something bad from happening until after it's already happened. So we're seeing a huge increase in the number of successful attacks because nobody knows what an anomaly looks like in their network anymore. Nobody knows where the data is supposed to be coming from or where the data is supposed to be going. And a lot of people, they only detect it when it's too late or the data's already been taken out of the network or something's already been encrypted or the denial of service attack is already hit. So when you're looking at this too, you know, you see all of this stuff around teleconferencing, everything, you know, virtual is the new way of the world. You know, how are you going to make sure that you're only got the people on board your equipment that you want to be there, that only the people are listening, that nobody's recording, that nobody's sharing information over it. So a lot of good tips out there, and you can get these directly from DHS or CISA's website. I won't go into them too much because I do want to be respectful of time here. So let's just jump down actually to this part here. I want to let everybody know that CISA is here to help you. We are proactive. We would like to work with you on cyber preparedness. Cybersecurity advisors such as myself exist throughout the entire United States. We're a growing organization. When I first came on board 4 years ago, there was only 7 of us. Now there's up to almost 30 of us, and we're getting ready to hire 50 new people on over the next year. We are here to assist you with your cybersecurity program. Reach out to me or CISA to find out who your cybersecurity person is, and we can start helping you, try and figure out what we can do in order to assist you with your cybersecurity program. We offer incident response. We offer remote assistance for you. We can do cyber exercising. If you're not doing cyber exercising with your new environment, then you're still trying to use an old playbook for the way that things currently are, and it's probably not going to work. Everybody I've helped in the last few months do incident response, they said their old playbook for incident response no longer works because their workforce no longer looks like it did when they wrote their exercise or when they wrote their incident response or their disaster recovery plan. Things don't, you know, kind of work that way anymore. So we can help you develop exercises. We can facilitate your exercises for you. And last but not least, we can actually do cybersecurity assessments. We can give you a scorecard to show you where you are today and where you would like to be in 3 years and in 5 years. We can do strategic level assessments for you. We can do tactical level assessments. The big thing about all of these assessments, everything that I'm showing you here on the screen and the things on the other screen, there's no charge for anything that we do. We are a federal service. We are available for anybody to utilize. We do have to prioritize based on national level significance, but we do try and assist everybody that we can. We can come out, we can do exercising with you, we can do assessments with you, we can do training for you. We can help match you up with vendors that are going to get you over that big hump too. We can help you identify which areas need to focus on the most. That's really what we're here for. We're here to assist you with making your program go forward. I know I went through all that really, really fast, and I apologize for that. There is a lot of information to cover. I would really like, if anybody would like to reach out to me, we can schedule some one-on-one time. It takes about an hour to go through everything for me to show you everything that CISA can do for you or with you. If you have other organizations or you have projects going on, we'd be more than happy to assist you with those projects as well. You can reach out to cyberadvisor@hq.dhs.gov, or that's my phone number right there. My name is Clint Walker. I'm from the federal government, and I'm here to help. Thank you.
Hey, Clint, thank you so much. We have a question here. What is the best way to validate technical assistance if remote and you are allowing access to the computer?
So which side is doing the validation? Let me ask that. So is it the help desk that's trying to validate that it's actually a user? I mean, that's something that each organization kind of needs to work out for themselves is, do they have, a registry? When I was with the banking industry many, many years ago, it was one of those things where anytime we called them the help desk would say, okay, who are you? And then they'd say, thank you. And, we'll call you right back. And they'd hang up, and then they'd call me on the number that was listed in our GAL or our address list. And that was how we started communications from there. So,
right.
That was a big thing for us, is that there was no one person that could call in and say, I need help right now, and help started to get, there was always a callback, based on the numbers listed in there.
Yeah.
Sometimes that might not be possible if it's the phone or something. So having an in-band and out-of-band communication model is key these days, especially, I've been to a lot of incidents recently where it was the email system or the phone system we could no longer rely on. So how do you communicate when it's the bad guys or the threat actors that have control of those systems, and they're reading everything, or they're looking at all the messages going across, and they're staying one step ahead of you because they know what you're trying to do. Yeah. So having that out-of-band communication model is good too.
Yeah, I guess, with every new cure, there is a new curse that comes out a week later, I guess. So I guess
bad guys make money off of this, so they're always going to be one step ahead of us.
Yep, I believe there's a lot of job security in cybersecurity. And with that being said, I know it was mentioned before, at least with other previous times that you have spoken, is CISA currently recruiting right now for cybersecurity experts?
Oh, CISA, I think everybody is recruiting for cybersecurity experts. So CISA definitely is looking for cybersecurity personnel. If you look out there, there's the new cybersecurity bill in the Senate that says that we're going to put cyber coordinators in every state. Then we have the cybersecurity advisor program that goes hand in hand with that. We have all of the resources. So we're trying to ramp up all of our teams, our pen testing teams, our forensics teams. So across the board, and it's not just us, so the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Health and Human Services, everybody, nationwide, last time that I saw, there was 800,000 cybersecurity positions that currently were unfilled.
Wow.
Across the United States. So cybersecurity is in huge demand. And I always tell people that you better love this job, because this job will chew you up and spit you out very quickly. You have to have a passion for cybersecurity. I have a lot of college kids that I mentor that come out and they get into it because they think that, they can make a quick buck. And I tell them, you're going to put in the hours to get that money. They usually switch to something else after a year or two in the field, because it is a very demanding field. But those of us who are in it, we love what we do. And I would love to be out of a job, to tell you the truth. I would love for it to be a safe and secure world. I'd love to see that in my lifetime, so that I'd never had to, work again in this field. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in.
What would you do? Teach volleyball at Club Med? I don't even know if it still exists,
That would be a dream job, yes.
Yeah, that's actually my dream job. Okay, we have another question from Chuck. Chuck asks, is VPN still the best practice, and should you force all of the employees through a VPN even when using SaaS, PaaS, IaaS services?
So once again, I would love to give a blanket statement, but unfortunately, every industry needs to look at what their business function is and what they're trying to do. Yes, I think VPN is still for most organizations, it's still going to be the way to go. What we saw when all of this hit was that most people didn't have a scalable VPN solution. Or they didn't, some people might need VPN, other people might not. It depends on what data the organizations are giving access to. We've been preaching for a long time in the cybersecurity field that everybody, that your people should be thought of the same way as data. Who needs access to what?
Right.
Least privileges on people. So if you're already scaled your network, or you already have your segmentation where you can say, hey, these people don't need to go through VPN because they're working with data that is just public or we're not really worried about, then great. But if you haven't done that, if you don't know where people can go, if you haven't locked down to where people can access on the network, then yes, everybody needs to go through the VPN. And then you also need to make sure that your security stacks, your security tools are monitoring that VPN traffic. What's going in, what's going out. The non-repudiation thing. Can you actually attribute every activity back to an individual user, individual person? You have group accounts that you're using. I mean, there's so many things that you can throw in here. And once again, it comes down to an organization know what they're trying to accomplish, what people should have rights to, and baselining that traffic so that you can pinpoint an anomaly very quickly and make an action or reaction to it as fast as possible.
Then you could throw in some AI to monitor that traffic too. So.
Oh yeah, the bad guys are starting to use AI for attacks, so we need to start using AI for defense.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Clint, thank you so much for your time. I guess I could let you go back to either doing volleyball or cybersecurity, so you can choose it.
Well, unfortunately, I have to jump now to get onto another exercise for another organization, so it never stops for us, and then I've got instant response for the rest of the day. So I really appreciate coming out here to speak. I always enjoy it, and stay safe, everyone, and call me if you need me.
You got it. Clint, thank you so much. Hopefully you'll get some sleep one of these days, maybe in the next decade or so, okay?
Yeah, my next slide.
Yeah, next slide. Thank you, Clint. And to all those that are with us, we have our Cybersecurity Summit coming up, the first big virtual one, coming up July 28th, so certainly mark your calendars. We do have a few more power hours, and this is going to be our final month of the power hours. So you can check to see what the schedule is on cybersummitusa.com, and then right after the end of July, we're going to be having cybersecurity summits all throughout the country, focusing on best practices, best solutions, experience sharing. Should be a very, very wonderful open forum because, as we now know, with the new world we're living in, anyone can now, register from wherever they are in the country. And we certainly welcome a very large audience for those cybersecurity summits. Thank you again for joining us. Again, most of the slides will be up within about 2 days. For those that have stayed with us, you'll be getting a CPE certificate also in about 2 days. And as Clint said, stay safe, stay secure, and we look forward to seeing you at our events in the very near future. Take care from all of us from the Cybersecurity Summit. Take care.
We created IoT Nation to help professionals like you navigate the IoT space, to find the companies, people, use cases, and events that are most relevant for you. On IoT Nation, you can browse over 25,000 IoT-related companies and dive into the details for specific ones. You can also search geographically, zoom into any area of the map, and explore companies in any city. You can find applications in various verticals, such as smart buildings, smart cities, connected mobility, and many more. And you can plan your week and month ahead by searching dozens of online and offline events to find the ones that are most relevant for you. For all Cyber Summit Power Hour attendees, we are offering free use of IoT Nation Pro for 30 days with the code CYBER2020V. If you have any questions, contact us at info@iotnation.com.